that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's kick this off because we've got a full agenda. Welcome everyone for coming. And this is the Earth, Space and Environmental Sciences Interest Group, which has been going for quite some time. The focus of this group is more on research infrastructures, particularly for data and also for semantics. And what we basically do is meet at each plenary and share notes on new infrastructure projects that we know about. So if you know of any, feel free to speak up when we get to that point. And then also we do a deep dive, and this time our deep dive will be led on by Kirsten Leonard on the new emerging issues of the pervasive growth of 2D, 3D imagery in the Earth and environmental sciences. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, so if you the link is in the chat to the session notes. Please can you fill in your name and email if you feel up to it, and we'll maybe start that as a meeting place where we can share more notes. And I'll move into the first one. Probably the simplest way is if I put the link in the chat to the two catalogs that this group runs. So that's the first one, and it is the one is the vocabularies, and the other, which is coming now, is the research infrastructures. And people just gradually add to these. And so please, if you've got time, I'll maybe just take a few minutes now to add your infrastructures and some contact details. So if you like, it's just a catalogue of research infrastructures that are specific to Earth and environmental sciences. And there's a second one, which is about where Earth sciences are participating in cross-disciplinary infrastructures. The second one is about semantic resources, and we're trying to keep track there of major vocabulary services or servers or projects where people are publishing community vocabularies in Earth and environmental sciences. So again, if you've got time, you've got the links. Can you please just add to them as and when you feel up to it? Are there any questions on either of our catalogues? Okay, so now we'll go to our next one. Well, we're getting way ahead of time. Give you lots more time, Kirsten. We've done the two catalogues. We've done that. We're just going to do a couple of lightning talks. I'll present the first one on behalf of Kirsten Elgar, who couldn't make it. And then I'll just quickly go into the second one, and then I'll hand over to Shelley. So let's go into the next slide. And we are in this group trying to get closer connections through to the science unions. Part of the reason why we do that is because they give us a path through to the scientists that particularly if they are associated with CODATA, the Commission on Data of the International Science Council, then some of them, like astronomy, crystallography, pure and applied chemistry, and geology, are very active in setting data infrastructures and standards for that domain. And this is a new development which has been led by Kirsten, which is where in the geodesy and geophysics, there are 8 unions covering things like geodesy, geomagnetism, hydrology, ocean seismology, volcanology, and cryosphere. And in a few of them, not all, there are some data commissions, but they're all kind of working as silos. And so we've put in this proposal to the union for them to fund a workshop where we can explore issues that are common in data across all of these. So next slide, please. And in our proposal, we propose the following projects. Standardize the way persistent identifiers are used for data sets across all those all those geophysical groups. Get some compatible metadata standards to enhance discovery, interoperability, and reusability. We were hoping that maybe what we could do is also get funding for a registry to provide access to geophysical researchers on fair, compliant vocabularies and best practices. Another one too is that a lot of those groups run observatories or ground stations, and they all go out, dig a hole, stick an instrument in it, and make some measurements. And but how they do that, how they record the location, the transceivers, everything, it's different enough that it'll be very hard to make data from them interoperable. And the final one too is that as the computational structures get bigger and bigger, a lot of the standards that did them well in the 1980s, 90s, many of which were ASCII based, just don't scale. And so there's a move to these HDF5 formats. And so we're arguing that if we all talk together across, say, seismology, geophysics, geomagnetism, magnetotellurics, so we talked across them, then with these big platforms, you can actually start doing multi-physics integration of the data. But we will have to have some standardization, both of the HDF formats and of the CF conventions that go with each. So that's just a heads up that geodesy and geophysics are starting to think that way. And we know if they're really serious is if they do fund our proposal for this workshop. I'll move on to the next one. As I said, the focus of this group is on starting to identify the research infrastructures and the projects that are building big data or compute or software infrastructures. And we just had a, what can you say, fortuitous, opportunistic meeting in April 2024. And we had these groups from Europe, US, Australia, and some international groups present, and we all agreed that we needed to start a conversation about sharing developments because in some cases in Australia, we're reinventing the wheel as to what's going on in either the US or Europe. And part of the reason why we do this is because we don't know about what's going on. I've put a link there. You can get it from the notes because these slides are connected to the notes. And if you have a research infrastructure and you'd like to be involved in that, please let me know. And particularly interested in RIs that are outside of Australia, Europe, and the US. So that's my two contributions. Shelley, do you want to go on with yours, or does anyone want to ask any questions on those two? If not, Shelley, take it away.
Thank you, Leslie. So I'm going to connect the dots with what Leslie has just talked about and the work that's happening here in the IG with our working groups. And I'm glad Danny's on because I'll give you a quick update on the working groups that we're sponsoring. I'm going to talk about the discussion where we are with the ideas around a community of practice for the Earth, Space, and Environmental Sciences and what that means within RDA, and highlights from the Birds of a Feather that we had about the community of practice and its current status. So here we go. and Leslie, if you could help me watch time, I don't want to wax too poetic. So the two working groups that this IG is supporting, one of them has been endorsed, the complex citations. Things are going well. We have our breakout session next week. It is a large project, and those first 18 months have been a little slow going because of the number of stakeholder groups that we have to coordinate with. But we will have an output and likely additional work following. So if you could please join us, I won't say a whole lot about it, except we're getting there, and there are use cases beyond the earth and space sciences that are helping to make the possible solution usable by everyone. I did hear yesterday that there was one of us who doesn't think it will work. So Kirsten Leonard, that was you. I will follow up with you and make sure that we understand your use case and if it fits or not. So follow up for you. And then the other group is the Coordinating Earth, Space, and Environmental Science Data Preservation Scholarly Publication Processes. This is a proposed group. The charter, the case statement has not been submitted yet. But Danny Kincaid, Natalie Rea, Matthew Bork, and Leslie Wyborn are leading this. And they did have 2 days ago a session here at RDA where the recording is available, and they are moving forward at a nice brisk pace. One of the highlights from that session is really keen interest from our publishers. Danny, do you want to say anything quickly about that?
Only that the broadly the challenge that we're trying to grapple with is assisting or greasing the skids, if you will, easing the touch points between repository workflows for data publication and the journal and publisher workflows for the scholarly publication when they rely on the data. So there are some challenges and some friction there going on right now, and it's really wonderful that we got some interested publishers. So we had, who did we have? We had Wiley, we had Taylor and Francis, we had Nature, and we had Elsevier. Yeah.
Yep.
So there's some interest in there. Everybody thinks this is a great idea. Currently, talk about siloed. These stakeholders don't talk to each other very much. So just getting everyone in the same room is progress. But if you're interested in this space, please join us. I can put the link to our RDA page in the chat.
Great.
Thanks.
Great. Yeah, please join the page so you can get the emails. And one other thing to highlight, this is really, for those of you who may have participated on a previous RDA working group that built the workflows, this one is really focused on those challenges with domain discipline specific repositories, the time it takes to curate that data, and also those institutional repositories that use the data curation network, for instance. So that we're building in that time and getting the data that should be in those repositories away from the quick timeline that can be felt within publication. So helping researchers think of their data deposition and curation separately from their paper. And we're going to need the publishers to do that because some authors commonly don't have that in their mind. Great. I hope everybody joins us. All right, let's scoot along there. There we go. So the Earth and Space and Environmental Science Community of Practice, just really, for those of you who aren't aware that we've got this on our mind, we did start talking about it in an interest meeting over a year ago. We introduced it during our session at IDW last October. With some early conversations on what the scope should be, what the areas of interest should be, the challenges that we would have with it. And then we talked more about it in January ESIP during the session on working with RDA as an international partner. And then again, a couple days ago in a Birds of a Feather here at Virtual Plenary 22. So we do have a very skeletal page. Please don't go there and think you're going to learn a lot about it. Instead, go to the recording. But do join the group if you want to be kept up to date. So let me dig in on it. a community of practice at RDA, think of it as an umbrella idea. So, whatever definition you have for community of practice, go big. And it's meant to focus in on a disciplinary area. Although it can be broad in other ways. The only other community of practice at RDA is the agriculture folks. And the focus is meant to deal with disciplinary data challenges. And, many of you, I hope all of you are thinking, well, the interest group can do that. Yeah, they can do that. And that is kind of, we will get to that towards in this topic and at the end of this session on when we stand up the community of practice, we're beyond if, we're at when. How does this the folks associated with this IG want to take it forward, knowing that we will not lose any of the tracks that we've been working on thus far. They will have a home. So the reason for standing up the community of practice, we're looking to engage with additional stakeholders beyond just our go-to data folks, and create a persistent community that helps to advance the things that we're interested in. We are including software here, keeping in mind that software is one of the creators of data. Instruments, of course, but also software, and aggregated and simulated ways, and in analysis, and so we really feel like to have an ongoing community that tracks the challenges. And I'm just thinking about what was presented this morning with the work that's happening, potential work in geodesy and geophysics, the one geochemistry that Kirsten Leonard and others and Leslie Wyborn are leading. We didn't hear about it today, but we've heard about it previously. How can we, these potential short-term projects and long-term projects keep each other informed and help each other with reducing collaboration, reducing any duplication, and doing that beyond just folks interested in informatics, inviting in industry, inviting in funders, inviting in other entities that help in this world. So here, I'm not going to talk to these, but these are the topics that you all have brought to the attention of where the community of practice could be influential. We either in finding folks that are already doing this and highlighting that within the group, standing up a working group, helping to find funding for these efforts, so a larger footprint potentially. And the value proposition is that, and that's the title there, Improving Earth, Space, and Environmental Science Data Community of Practice. We did just add in data not data, but a space at the BOF. There had been a discussion in some of the earlier conversations that we would leave space, meaning planetary heliophysics, out of our discussion because RDA is doesn't have a strong space presence. But then we re-argued it earlier this week that doesn't matter. We can pull space in, and there is an important international component where we can connect between the European Space Agency, JAXA, and our own NASA and other regional space agencies that is needed. And we should not leave them out of the conversation. We don't believe there is a persistent platform that's looking at this breadth of content, and we believe that this is going to be valuable. A lot of the work I do at AGU, I don't want, the communities that I work with are not just AGU communities. They span EGU, JPGU, the oceans folks, and beyond. So a lot of the work that I do really would benefit from a neutral home such as RDA. So the status, here's our name. I have to update it on the website as soon as I have figured out how to do that. Our new website is continuing to improve at RDA. The case statement is just about there. There's a few things to smooth out. I will put a link to the case. Well, actually, if somebody else could put a link to the case statement for me, I'm juggling too many windows at the moment for you all. The groups that you're all associated with, if you could please make sure they're represented, should they be, assuming you're all here because this is relevant to you, if you could please make sure they're identified in the table within the case statement. We want to be as inclusive as possible. We will request, assuming we get approved in everything. Of course, I'm quite hopeful there. We'll request a session for RDA 23 as a community of practice. We had to pick an initial 18-month objective. So that aligning to what Leslie said earlier about standards, data management standards for geodesy and geophysics, we would like to push that across all of the disciplines, especially where we don't have a current effort happening, identifying, standing up working groups that help with those gaps, and then coordinating across our own networks so that we have these common guidance and maybe even platforms. And then we do feel that this community of practice will benefit from having someone dedicated. And I believe that if we are coming together to coordinate across not only what our current IG is coordinating, which is brilliant, and I'm very proud of the work that's happened so far, but we can do more if we have dedicated people. And the intent is to perhaps a Tiger opportunity, or we could actually find additional funding for someone dedicated to us, or both. Although I think if we find funding, we would not take Tiger so that somebody else could. So that is the intent. And the question that will be at hand is, how do we want to proceed with the IG? So put in your mind, we won't talk about it just now, put in your mind, do we want the IG to continue? Shall we evolve it and incorporate it into the community of practice and dissolve this IG? Either answer is fine. Maybe there's another option you all are thinking about, and we'll come back to the question. Leslie Wyborn will guide us when we get there. And I am complete. Kirsten, I'm going to stop sharing because I believe you have your own slides.
So just before we switch to Kirsten, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask, or just nominate a research infrastructure that we're not aware of that we could incorporate within these meetings? Okay, if not, let's hand over to Kirsten, because I know she's got a busy meeting. And she's stepped out of that to come to this for us.
Thanks. So I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully get this going into a format that works. Okay. Last time, the last RDA session where I did this and sharing my screen, actually my computer crashed. So hopefully I will stay on and get this done. This is actually, now that Shelley was talking of the community of practice and the working groups that we have right now in the interest group, a very important connection, I think, because this is a specific topic that I think has relevance to multiple groups, domains within the earth, space, and environmental sciences. And that is, how do we manage, publish, and archive imagery that is generated as part of our research. I'm doing this together with a colleague, Josh Ainsley, who will talk in a moment. He is at the University of Glasgow and actually working with imagery. So, I'm on the side of the managing, publishing, archiving, and he is on the side of reuse and making sure that the data that images are available. So the motivation why we got this started is sort of the usual context of open science, making data available, and in this case, making images available for others to reuse so that we can maximize all the resources that have been put into generating these these images. And this is primarily microscopic imaging, and increasingly also the X-ray tomography that is done on many samples. But there is also, and this is known across different disciplines, a concern about how images are processed and analyzed, and that there have been studies actually into mishandling of image data, and that clearly needs to be addressed by making both the images available, the underlying data as well, and then the processes, how they have been interpreted and turned into real scientific insights. So the situation that we're dealing with is that the use of imagery is growing in the earth sciences, and there aren't really any well-defined standards and practices how to share them, how to archive them. But they do exist in other domains, such as in biology, in the medical sciences, and so on. And there is a lack of coordination between different geoscience communities. This imagery and XCT is used in quite a number of subdomains, be it, in structural geology, be it in, the study of mineral physics, porosity, and so on, as well, to a large extent in geochemistry. And what I realized when I first started looking into this is that policies and infrastructure for actually publishing and archiving any imagery is really lacking. I'm coming from the geochemistry side of things, so I'm actually running two archives or repositories for research data. One is the EarthChem Library, and the other one, the Astromaterials Data Archive. And in both cases, we have a growing community that actually has data generated through studies with electron microprobe methodologies that need to be linked to tabular data published in the literature. Especially the Astromaterials Data Archive is now receiving massive amounts of XCT and other image data, backscatter images, and so on from the just started sample analysis of the OSIRIS-REx mission. And we want to make sure that the way we're archiving these images is going to ensure that the images can be reused in the future, that they can be maybe reinterpreted, reprocessed, and so on. How do we do that? Which standards out there in other domains can be adopted? And which other, metadata, vocabularies, and so on, do we need to define that are specific for the Earth and planetary sciences? So here's just the example, of Astromat. So I'm going to skip that because I already talked about that. And with that, I want to introduce Josh and allow him to give a bit of insights into his research with imagery and what that means for, I'm trying to get out of the sharing, stop share. What that means for best practices for the archiving, where the challenges are.
All right. Thank you very much, Kristen, for the intro. I'll get started here. And just let me share my screen now. That should be, no, on the screen. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so this is largely a talk I gave back at ESIP in January. I've added maybe one or two more slides. But it's kind of to give a better sense of what Kirsten is talking about in this case here. So what I'd like to do, let's get to the next slide. So this is coming out of a workshop we ran in Goldschmidt as well. So these are all the co-authors and a lot of my students and collaborators who contributed a lot of the images that you're going to see here. So what kind of images are we talking about? We're not talking about the remote sensing community. They're actually fairly robust and large, and they have their own image sharing standards. And there is a complexity that they don't have, that we have in microscopy, that is a little bit different than that. And similarly, generally with like generic photographs, we're not talking about that. While we may use image processing techniques to analyze our data is a little bit different. So what I'd like to say here is that there's overlap in the sense that an image is an image, but with microscopy, we have a complexity of our data in the sense that we're actually usually high dimensional. So what do I mean by this? Here is a lovely plot of all the microscopy techniques that are generally considered or most people think about. There's a couple that are probably not on here. So if your favorite technique doesn't make my plot, I'm sorry. This is just a good plot that kind of shows off the distinction here between both spatial resolutions as well as analytical resolutions. So how much of a detection of a structure can we get? And the key bit here that I really want to emphasize is that what this means is that with a lot of these microanalytical techniques that we're actually focusing on here, we're not just measuring things like an image structure, like you would think about with a lot of remote sensing and or just photograph data here. They actually have information that tells me things about the chemistry or the crystallography. So like you see here in this right-hand image here, I have a diffraction pattern that was collected from this inner growth here at the nanoscale, where I'm collecting diffraction patterns every 2 nanometers. Similarly, at about a similar spatial resolution, I have a chemical maps here that I've turned into phase maps that you can see. So what we're talking about are large, complex data sets that are multidimensional. If you think about the chemistry or that already inflates us beyond 3 dimensions into something like 2048. So we have huge, complex data sets. And what we are living in now is very much what is the trend in microscopy is what is called correlative microscopy. So the idea here is that I examine a sample possibly with XCT and get a 3D scan of it, and then I maybe use energy dispersive spectroscopy or XRF to scan the chemistry of the sample, and then we somehow kind of overlap the 2 images in a very just layering kind of effect. And you get some ideas here, and then maybe you squint and cross your fingers and you select an area for a higher resolution study further on, so that I'm always looking at the same sample, and we try to make quantitative connections to the data sets by spatial overlap. And this is the big trend in microscopy, not just in geology, but across all of material sciences in the world right now, and is even at the heart of some of the biosciences and some of the techniques that they're driving forward there. But this correlative approach is very much trying to assume a linear pathway down, and we want to start thinking about how can we do things better. So this is where, that is the stage we're in, that is the world we're in. So we want to develop better tools for better correlative microscopy. And this is allowed by the fact we have automated instruments now that can collect very large data sets. So we want to figure out how can we take these digital twins that we're now making and use them in a more data-driven manner. So to do this, there are basically what I would say are 3 grand challenges. The first of this is how can we effectively manage large data volumes? We need to figure out tools here, and this is part of what this community here can help us work on. And the reasons we want to do this is that we want to be able to reuse the microscopy data. And the third challenge is how do we preserve the meaning of it? So to answer the first one, we want to look for open repositories that are connected to one another. We preserve the raw data so that we can reuse it in a meaningful manner in the future. And we're going to standardize the open data formats. So I'm going to talk you through these challenges now. So we are in the era of big microscopy data. Up until about 10 years, 5 years ago even, usually a microscopy data set would be high dimensional. So we'd collect lots of energy channels, lots of diffraction patterns, but a single data set would be maybe 100 megabytes at best. Right now, examples of like this plot down here, which is crystal orientation across a third of a thin section, represents 256 gigabytes of data. Similarly, this large montage tile of a chemical map taken using energy dispersive spectroscopy represents 250 gigabytes of data. So in order to just load and manipulate these data sets, we need to start thinking about machine learning techniques much more than would have been traditional with this. This also means that we need to have better tools for sharing the data, because this gets us to the second grand challenge that I mentioned, which is that you need to remember that when you publish a figure, you publish that microscopy data, that is not the actual data. That figure in your paper is 1/100th, 1/110th of the actual data there. So this is the figure of some tomography data I took using Fib nanotomography at nanoscale. That itself is kind of an interpolation and stills from this three-dimensional model that I built. But that model itself is now derived actually from an aligned stack of binary images, which were derived from this aligned stack of grayscale backscatter electron images, which in themselves were originally this. If we preserve this raw data, which is all the way up the right-hand side, somebody in the future could come back with a better alignment algorithm and produce a better model. But if they're only relying on the figure that is seen in the paper, they can never reproduce or reanalyze my data. So it doesn't matter how nice the paper is, the data is largely lost. So we need to remember that if we're going to come up with standards for saving and reusing data, it's the raw data that's most useful because that's where we can advance our practices through it. The other one is that microscopy data is a lot more than pretty pictures. As I was reminded when I started my postdoc in Cambridge, we are quantitative data, so we need to always have scale bars, and we always need to talk about calibrated energy axes so that what we can talk about is what the data is actually meaning in terms of the physical sample. So if we don't preserve the metadata, which means that the metadata needs to be preserved with that raw data, it needs to be packaged together in an open data format. As soon as we lose that metadata, the information that not just tells me how the experiment was run, but how what is the quantitative size of this image here, and as each pixel here is actually a spectra, what is the energy channels? How is this calibrated? If I don't have that there, then it is largely meaningless data and it becomes a cartoon as opposed to something that allows me to do science. So those are the challenges that we are trying to address here and trying to develop with this kind of community of practice that we're building. Because what we really want to do is be able to connect data sets. My group works a lot in-house, trying to, and actually very well, getting it so that we go from one instrument, identify regions of high variability, and then take a higher resolution study. But then we're able to then update our model with information coming from that high resolution result and improve our understanding of our low resolution data. So in this way, high resolution data is now talking with the low resolution to make a much more complete picture. In order to do this much more effectively, we need to start thinking about how can we connect the data sets in a quantitative manner. This is again why we need the metadata there, but also it makes the potential that if you could think about a sample that potentially had data collected at one university and that data lives in an archive at my university here in Glasgow, but I got the sample and the initial measurements from the National History Museum in London. I want to be able to connect those two archives and just be able to pull the digital information together without having to repeat the experiment in-house. And so here is an example of where I'm talking about. This is a proposal that Kirsten is a project partner on that we've just submitted to STFC. This is a chondrite called Bulkfeld. What's interesting are these dark green clasps here, which talk about the hydration history on these early primitive planetesimals. What we want to do is we want to advance the microscopy with machine learning tools to not just identify mineral regions, but lithologies, so that I can identify this class compared to this other class over here and say whether or not they're the same collection of minerals. And once we do that, we have developed a new set of classifiers for data that what we'll be able to do is apply this to old data that exists in Astromat. This will then allow us to both refine our model and come up with better classifiers, but more importantly, allow us to identify samples that are in archives that we can reuse and redo for new physical experiments. So it allows us to use old data to identify and generate new experiments in a very much data-driven manner. So this is the idea of what we're talking about, of how we want to be able to have good archives with good open data formats, such that I can actually take my data that I've developed in-house and my machine learning algorithm and now apply it to an archive. And there's one part of this opportunity is that we're now in a pathway where there have been a proliferation of tools for exploring these multidimensional data sets across multimodalities. Some of them are the tool SAMUS here that you see that's been developed as part of the OSIRIS-REx project. Additionally, there's Strabo Spot has their own Strabo micro tool. And then museums have been developing the International Image Interoperability Framework. These are all great tools. They all have their pluses and minuses, but they're not really oriented towards the type of let's connect a lot of databases, and then or some of them connect databases, but they don't necessarily support all the image formats that we work with. And the last example here of this proliferation tools is from Zeiss, and I bring it here because I like this schematic. It very much shows the problem that we have, which is that they envision all these tools here that they have, a lot of their own microscopes attached with different things, going to a data server in your location. So it could be here in Glasgow, and it creates their Zen thing. But what they don't have, and what they say, oh, well, we can connect to some external databases here, is that there isn't a real good bridge here for how this works. How do we connect these databases between the database I build here in-house to a database that exists at another university? And there is not a set standard for how these connect. If we base it all solely on Omero, for example, we'll be going down and having to use only biology data formats, which may or may not be compatible with a lot of the microscopy techniques that the material scientists use, i.e. us as geologists are much more in common with material science than we have with biology. So we want to develop our data standards that are more in line, not with biotools, but with material sciences. So that takes me to the end here, which I'm just going to restate this, which is that automation has improved, and improving detectors has made it that we are in big microscopy data. And so this gives us our first challenge. Where are we going to put all the data? And I would point out that it's probably too much to expect any one university, any one institution to house all the data. Instead, we need to come up with standards and tools for connecting our databases together. We need to remember that the figure that is in your paper is not the actual data. There's a lot of data that never gets published that compiles as a study or that is never represented. So we need to be able to communicate for how do we preserve this data in the repositories. The microanalytical data only has meaning when we can keep and preserve the metadata. The HDFI format is one that I use within my group quite commonly because it allows us to create a data structure that preserves these metadata features, i.e. what were the experimental conditions, what are the pixel sizes, what are the energy channels. It tells us that information. But it is a project that really much needs to be the domain experts, i.e. us, pushing back against vendors to make sure that they stop producing and saving all their data in proprietary formats. Finally, we want to connect all the data. So we want to bring all our repositories together. And this is really where it's the grand opportunity, is that we want to make fair data that's analysis ready, so fairer microscopy data, so that AI tools or machine learning tools would enable us to create a big multi-scale approach that really allows us to work across data formats. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. I'll leave this up there for questions if people want to pester me. Thank you.
Excellent, Josh. That was great. So yeah, I'd really like to leave a little bit of time for people to ask questions to Josh. Just raise your digital hand. Shelley, yes, go ahead.
Oh, this is just incredible. Thank you both for the awareness, for the, the challenges that you're experiencing, for the incredible ability to reuse the information, a real example on the type of community building, like if we show people how this is valuable, I think that's it's just really incredible. The question is, MARTA, the Materials Research Data Alliance, is that are you guys connected to them?
At the moment, no.
Okay.
I need to probably get in touch with them.
Okay, I can help if you don't know them. So
that would be great. I'd
okay.
appreciate that.
Yep.
That's I know within not that long ago, my colleague down at UCL, he was spending a lot of time going to the different microscopy conferences and pushing on about data standards, and he was still having a lot of pushback of just, why do we need this? Why is this important? And it wasn't really within the microscopy community always understood as a big issue. I think it's the coming of bigger data that we are now seeing a better awareness of that.
And I love the connection you have to the raw data. I mean, the use case is so perfect. And we have so much trouble with that. Thank you.
Steve.
Well, that was a great presentation. Thanks, Joshua. I've been working with Kirsten on the data specs for delivering data to Astromat, and I'd be really curious to know if you said you were getting a lot of the raw metadata in your HDF files, and I'd be really interested in learning more about exactly what you're getting in there and how it's formatted in terms of thinking about how that could be generalized and maybe turned into some kind of specification.
Yeah, so there's a couple things in there on that. The joy of HDF files is that I can keep all the metadata in there. The downside is that there isn't really a defined structure to it.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, right now, my group spends a lot of time converting between the Oxford Instruments HDF5 file and a HDF5 standard that is a little bit more common throughout the broader microscopy community that's been developed by the HyperSpy community. And we just do that because we use the HyperSpy library so much for our processing.
Right.
That we want to just be in that format. So it would be nice if, like, for example, Oxford Instruments had just developed their their HDF5 file to just be compatible out of the box. That would have been nice. So instead, we're writing tools to just train, we write a function that does the whole thing for us. Kind of nice. Eventually, we'll be put in some library somewhere and we'll publish it. But I think the idea there would be, again, if we can come with enough of a community consensus of these are the things, and this is how we should structure it, because this is really an open HDF5 format for microscopy data and what it should look like, then it becomes something that we could even push back, as opposed to right now, communities like HyperSpy, which is again, like I said, it's a Python library community around microscopy data. They kind of get an API from a vendor, as opposed to saying, no, this is the API we want to do. And so I think we need more of a pushback from the community that says, this is what we want as a file format, because this is how we're archiving. And so how we can bring, awareness to that, I'd be ears, and it'd be great to talk about that.
Right.
Some of this in my own thing is that I've gone off in my own tangents in my own little worlds up there in Glasgow, thanks to COVID and whatnot.
Right. Well, all right, super. We'll be in touch.
Please do. I'd love to talk to you some more.
Danny.
I also will echo, this is amazing. And there are so many direct correlations or overlaps. The Venn overlap is pretty heavy with the oceanographic community, not computer generated images, but actual photographs of high resolution, microscopic bugs and again, the instrumentation is very specific. The data that comes off of it, there's no standardization across the instrumentation, and those are still proliferating within the community. And so I'm wondering how big your scope is, because they're in the actual types of images, there are differences, but the grand scheme of your challenges are identical.
So by and large, for most imaging, images are images. It's kind of nice. When we're working with more grayscale data, so like a backscatter electron image, secondary electron image, that doesn't really matter. That's all the same across it. And actually, even working with XCT data, it's all just grayscale. So that's all real easy to work with. And it all just becomes a TIFF. And then even if I wrap it up in an HDF5, it's still largely just a TIFF with a wrapper, with a bow on it, basically.
Yep. Yes.
It's when we start getting things like XRF data, EDS data, the chemical data there, where now, as opposed to getting just a single measurement, which is what grayscale is, and we start getting dimensionality, that's where we start needing to think about how's the best way to wrap this up? How do we want to best package it? And that's where, again, coming up with this idea of maybe a more standardized community structure that we say, this is the community's HDF5 file format, right? This is how we want it to look, and have very particular tags in it that identify the type of microscopy it is. Though once you have those in there, it becomes much easier to automate certain things, even tell things like our package HyperSpy, like if it sees an HDF5 file that has, well, not my package HyperSpy, our community's package HyperSpy, you know, we can work with them then to say, oh, if you see this and you see this tag, then it comes in as this type of image, right? Because within them, they can identify grayscale data one way and they identify multidimensional data with another signal type. And then they have tools for manipulating it that's really nice. So again, can we just start pushing back and say, well, listen, we're a very bright community. This is what we would like to see. This is what we need. And I think kind of one of the points here that's probably I didn't really talk about is that we also need people that are willing to code this,
Willing to,
code the problem.
oh,
right.
yes.
You know,
Yes.
like I can code some things, but certain parts of this and certain things like, and this is kind of where I ended up reaching out to Kirsten originally was, I was like, oh, I hear you have you have some image database stuff. How does that work? And when I really started digging on it, it was like, oh, okay, that's not quite what I want, or not quite the tool that I'm looking for. So, you know, I've been liaising with computer scientists here about trying to develop this tool. But again, we need to get some funding so that we can actually get some people focused on it to build the tools I actually want and build it. But that's
Got
more of
it.
a software engineering challenge.
Yes, yes. But if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that, hey, you know, there are these within images, there are these types, but there could be this solution that you know, if strategized well enough, can
Mhm.
deal with grayscale versus multidimensional.
Yeah,
It would
and
just be a
it's-
branch in the strategy of how you're reading
Yeah.
your HDF5 file. So I guess
that bit's
Hearing-
easy. That bit's easier.
yeah. So I guess I'm hearing that you are welcoming of just the
Yeah.
Yeah.
The broad,
Great.
the broad spectrum of techniques.
Great.
Which, I mean, if you ever talk to me about what you know, my research questions, you'll realize that as long as it involves a microscope of some kind, I'll probably play with it and put your sample in there. So I don't really am biased to any one microscopy over another. I think that they're all great and they have very specific uses and problems that they're good at solving and other ones that they're not so good. And we need to be able to combine them so that we can actually get a full picture of a sample, a full picture of the story that we're trying to actually build out with these measurements.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions? And if not, I'll just kind of try to get to some, you know, questions about what next.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm going to stop sharing now.
Great, thank you. And then
You're welcome. Thank you for all the great questions.
If you got more slides, yeah, Kirsten.
it's just basically
No, we got plenty of time. There's absolutely no problem at all. Keep going.
okay. So just kind of summarize, and you know, Josh already did a great job in I think kind of emphasizing the main topics that we've been talking about have been, you know, what are the standards and the best practices? What infrastructure do we have? What do we need? What additional funding may be needed? And then, you know, addressing some of the cultural issues. And I just have a few aspects there. One thing that I did before our first workshop that we held on this topic was contact some journals and say what's actually your policy with respect to images. And what I got back was generally, oh, we know the images have no place to go, really, they're so big and so on, so we're not asking anything. And you know, another journal actually got back and said, well, if you find out anything in your workshop, you know, let us know. We would be happy to do something. So I think we have a really great opportunity at the moment to undertake some activities that at least drive things forward. And you know, there is obviously the need for funding, for coding, for getting workshops together, getting people together. So from my perspective, you know, the the goals today were mainly getting this message out to the Earth, space and environmental science community, and see, how we can engage with people on a more, continuous basis. What I would really like to achieve is initially understanding what are the current requirements, and Josh has already given us a really great use case. And what are the resources that we need, that we have for sharing and reusing data in the earth sciences. We had in January a session at ESIP where we had 3 data systems. I think Josh mentioned them all. One was Strabo Micro, one was the SAMIS, the Sample Analysis Microinformation System, and the third was the Digital Rock Portal. These are all US-based systems, and I'd really like to broaden this out to anybody, in other parts of this world. What is happening? Are there approaches already taken, and any groups that do developments? In the US, there is a research coordination network funded. It's called Nocturne, non-clinical tomography data focused on that. It has representation from the earth sciences in there, but it's one of these fair open science research coordination networks, and I would like to do this on a much more international basis in order to come up with recommendations that can be implemented for publication, for publishing across the globe, and leads to standards that are not just a national approach. So the question is, what is the best way forward to collaborate on these best practices? How can we create an inventory of existing resources and so on? So this brings up some suggestions that I put in here. Do we need a working group in RDA? Is this actually happening in other domains, that they're thinking of an RDA interest group that potentially is multidisciplinary? As I know, in biology, as I said, in cultural heritage, there have been publications about best practices for imagery. The other thing would be a session at RDA, at the next RDA, that would invite people from different domains, so that there is an initial exchange at least. What type of proposals could we potentially start off with that give us funding to bring a global community together that is interested in this? So lots of questions, and I'd love to hear some suggestions, some ideas from the audience here today. If we do have the time, Leslie, I'm not sure where we are.
Yeah, we've got time.
We got time, so I don't see at the moment if there are comments in the chat or any raised hands. So maybe I need to just get out of my presentation and stop sharing so that I can see things.
I guess my question I'll throw over to the audience is kind of how relevant is this to your work, and whether you'd heard of it before. I think it's really significant that kind of, as Josh said, the volumes now are so big. I certainly know in the field of geochemistry, it's challenging them, because for decades, most geochemical data has been managed on thumb drives and Excel spreadsheets. And this is pushing geochemistry onto the data infrastructures. And I think that's creating a bit of a problem, because as long as the geochemists could stay on local infrastructures and thumb drives and Excel spreadsheets and email their results around to each other, they didn't really need to standardize or come to agreed specifications and best practices and protocols. And so it's also pushing geochemistry into that. But look, anyway, I'll stop chatting because part of the reason I heard this session with Kirsten, Josh, and a couple of others at ESIP, and I said, oh, you got to bring this to RDA. I'm just wondering, particularly seeing some of the people who are in the audience, have you heard of this topic being raised at RDA before? And if not, is it one that we could go ahead and form a working group? As Shelley said in her talk, we have been hatching working groups out of this interest group now for some time. So I'll go to hand over and see if someone wants to speak from the audience.
Shelley.
I think this is incredibly important. I mean, the optics that I have are you know, the challenges that researchers have at the time of publication, which is a very myopic view. It's usually quick, let's get a DOI, right? That's where they are. They're not thinking about the value of their data set. They're not realizing how it contributes to future research. And the approach that you're taking here, it just really excites me because I think that by posing to our communities, and I do mean like our you know, as opposed to coming through the informatics path, coming into the research community path and saying, listen, if you're able to actually see all the way, you know, experience the data all the way through and access the raw data such that you can reanalyze it with new techniques and new capabilities, that is something you want and should be asking for. And I just don't, there aren't many communities that have that. And if we can put this idea in front of them, and I don't mean just yours, right? Like yours is a brilliant use case. It needs to see the light of day. People need to understand why it's so valuable. But even the idea of building, you know, how do we build an infrastructure for any of our communities that need this kind of experience? And how would that lead into new research? This is what's in my mind right now.
Josh, yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
No, okay. Sorry. I think, Shelley, that's really exciting because I think the thing that made me hit there is that I think the one thing that's maybe a little bit different than like material scientists and biologists is that we can't reproduce our samples, right? We're not generally in the business of synthesis. We have limited samples that, you know, a lot of microscopy techniques are in some sense non-destructive, and some are even destructive to a point. So especially on the destructive ones, we need to be able to reuse that data and reevaluate it, at least with new numerical techniques, if I can't recollect it. But if we have old data that I can look at and at least recycle the data, then I can say, yeah, maybe I should go find that rock in somebody's archive, and hopefully their rock archive is good enough, which is always that's another crossed finger. But it highlights for me this question, like Bob Hazen asked us at AGU when we presented this, which is, why do you need to save this data? You know, because
that was the question at the AGU session, right?
Yeah.
Can we just redo it, the measurement, right?
Redo the measurement, but the thing is, and I think there's two things there, right? A, sometimes the sample is just destroyed. B, it's gone, and increasingly, geology departments are under pressure to get rid of our rock stores. I know over the last summer, we got rid of over 50% of our collection so that we could make room for new experimental equipment, right? And part of that was because when they looked at our rock store, our records were so abysmal that we didn't even know what half of what we had was. So
that brings us to the interest group of physical samples, right? There's a really cool connection.
Yeah, so anyways, I'm gonna lower my hand now and let somebody else chat.
Aaron.
Hi, I'm a software developer. I work with climate scientists. I'm new to the RDA, to this community. I saw environmental science in the title of this session, but I haven't heard anything about environmental science. I'm curious if there are environmental scientists here or involved in the interest group, and what they see as the overlap between that and geology. The kinds of data we have are remote sensing and simulation forecast outputs and simulation outputs, high resolution, large data, but a different type of data.
Yeah, Joshua, if you want to answer that.
I'll answer this because the environmental sciences that I do, like for example, we just published a paper looking at slags for carbon sequestration. So it's the materials that are actually involved in an environmental problem. They're either weathering under environmental conditions, they're being used for carbon capture and storage. They are a resource that we have and can potentially be a heavy metal pollutant. So the only way that you can solve some of those problems is through the microscopy and understanding that data. It's not just the remote sensing. And another aspect of my group is actually connecting remote sensing to microstructure. That is one of our big long-term goals. And I teach on remote sensing courses. And so there's a lot of the image processing and some of the really awesome techniques of remote sensing I steal from my code. But it's just that our data sets and what we actually can measure with our microscopes is a little bit more involved than a hyperspectral channel from our remote sensing data. There's a higher dimensionality that we can go to, especially when I work on crystallography data sets and or our tomography data sets, which are 3D. So there are a lot of commonalities there, but environmental sciences is more than just remote sensing, and there is a very big physical component to it in this sense.
Leslie.
Unmute. I just add that I work at the National Computational Infrastructure in Canberra, and that's a climate data center, and we have a lot of environmental data. And I find it interesting that like those guys have been in the world of particularly the climate guys, HDF, NetCF conventions, etc., for many years. And now I see this coalescence of the generic data management techniques using those formats, those methodologies are now creeping down into earth sciences, having come from those climate environmental groups. That's just an observation I'd make.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, I mean, that in my world of geochemistry, the environment, there's huge overlap towards the environmental sciences, the sample management, the analytical techniques, and so on. So I think we have many different connections that, are beneficial to bring those communities here under one big hat. But with that, I think, Leslie, we've used up our time.
No, I don't want to stop the conversation because we're really just going to go into a fairly quick one. If anyone's wanting a question or, whether, as I said, I'll throw it out again. Do people feel this is something that belongs in RDA and we take it further? I mean, I'm interested, Alice, you've got a comment there.
Else? Yeah.
Kirsten,
Alice,
Josh,
do you want
is
to
that
speak?
What was that?
Go ahead, Shelley.
I'm double checking. I believe from what you're saying, the intention is that you need an international audience to get this to coalesce. Yeah, I did a quick search on the groups while you were talking on keywords. I am not, maybe there's a couple one interest group and one working group that might be great to invite in, but they don't seem to be working on it. So
yeah, I had at the EGU meeting, I had some discussion with people from the Excite network in Europe, but they don't do anything about data standards. It's really focusing on the actual facilities, the instrumentation, and they would be happy to participate in discussions, but they're not leading efforts. I know, I mean, the World Fair project had a publication come out that pertained to imagery in cultural heritage, in the cultural heritage community.
Okay, so
I
they
can
might-
say that Bico Demo is working with the oceanographic community, and Josh was kind enough to make the nice, clear distinction between these multidimensional and the grayscale. But this would be in that vein. But we're working with zooplankton and phytoplankton researchers to get some standards that are just trying to get common metadata for reuse across these ridiculously proliferating instrumentation right now, the high resolution instrumentation. So that's they're trying to wrangle a champion. There's a bunch of people science interested in it, but they're trying to figure out the avenues for moving forward. So I think it would be great if they feel they need to be their own little, entity, certainly connecting and collaborating with this group, or if this group feels it's broad application to incorporate the ocean grayscale folks, then I think it's great.
Yeah, no. I think
The more the merrier.
I think the more the merrier, and I think, kind of the joy of what's going on in microscopy right now is that I think there's increasing number of techniques that could be applied to that. They may not even know that they could help solve some of their questions. So,
Yeah, I think that's very true. And but certainly all the same issues you're talking about are resonating with these folks. So saving these, saving the raw images. They have they subset. They have, obviously their use case is taking these giant swaths of high resolution stuff and making multiple little vignettes of interest and then annotating all those things. And and similar, right? Some of these things can't be resampled because they're flow through, they're just flow through cameras.
Snapshots, yeah.
Yeah, and that thing's gone, that thing swims away, or they are destructive samples if it comes from a sampling rosette. So same issues.
yeah.
Alice, do you have any comments about relevant this is to the Antarctic survey?
Yeah, so we do have, like Danny, a lot of see-through instrumentation with very high like high quality data where people are doing a lot of AI machine learning to know which species it is, and with like snapshot as well. And then we do have a rock store, and we have a sediment database. So some people do also geochemistry, but I'm less involved in that. So I know they are doing this, and I know that we have also the X-ray images you were talking about, and we wanted to link it to our database, but we are still like at the beginning of this, because the sample management is the first issue we have, and already we don't know which sample we have, so we are maybe a bit slow, and so I think we are just starting to kind of know what we have already before going to the image step. So I think we are a bit behind, but it's really interesting, and your presentation, Joshua, was amazing in really highlighting all the challenges, because I know that this is coming. So yeah, thank you.
Forewarned is forearmed. Well, look, I'd really like to thank Josh and Kirsten. I know, Kirsten, you've pulled yourself out of a meeting to attend to this. Thank you very, very much. It's certainly been enlightening.
And we'll follow up. Yeah, I'm gonna send out a message to the ESES group, and if anybody wants to stay in conversation, then we can just assemble a mailing list and see, when the next opportunities are to to dive even deeper into the topic. I think it would be good for us to try and get some funding for a bigger workshop and really focus.
Yeah. Yeah, I sent you a link about something that's happening in the UK on that note for a bigger workshop network that we can try and apply for. So,
Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for the opportunity to do this.
Well, when I heard you both at
Yes.
ESIP in January, I knew we had to have you here. So I know it was stressful, but thanks very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm heading out, so I'm going to take a look at the notes of what's coming.
I'm
It's
I'm
not
here
much.
at the end, so feel free
Okay.
to ask more questions.
All right. So Shelley, do we want to go back to the slides? Please. Where are we? I mean, really,
We're
it's
down to
what's
10
the,
minutes.
yeah, we're down to 10 minutes and we're 2 minutes ahead. Oh no, we're at 15 minutes. I mean, so go to the next slide, please. I guess what I'm arguing is, what can I say? It's hard enough to run the interest group. I don't think there's room to run both the interest group and the community of practice that Shelley has proposed. So to me, the best option is that we do, I guess what we can say is expand the work of the interest group, which to date is focused mainly on research infrastructures or data infrastructures, like just what we've presented needed to support image data. And we haven't had a session for a while, but in the past we've also had sessions on environmental science vocabularies, earth and environmental science vocabularies and semantics. But I see it more as we're taking the IG and we are expanding it. But we've also still got, as Shelley pointed out, those working groups that we've had before. And maybe we're going to spin up one on images, I don't know. But I guess what
Leslie,
I'm asking, does anyone have the desire to keep an IG going specifically on research infrastructures? I mean, what do people feel? Don't all speak at
Leslie,
once. Yeah, go on.
So what I would imagine, right, like, let's say we expanded to a community of practice, we just had this session. I would say that we do move forward with finding funding to help manage the group. Whoever does that would then connect with Kirsten and Josh. They would, help set up the mailing list. They would help write whatever case statement is needed for a new working group, should that be the desire to go forward. That's how I see it. And the reason I think it would be possible to get the funding to do that, from wherever, I've got NSF in mind, or maybe somewhere else, is because we would establish ourselves as this entity where people should come, where all stakeholders should be. And I think that would be that, not that the IG isn't that, but I think the argument would be more compelling for a community of practice. So it's, if we do that, I think the money could possibly come forward. And I'd be happy to navigate that or work with others who know of other opportunities. No guarantee.
So Shelley, if I understood what you were saying, it's so we move the IG to the COP, and then we seek out funding through that platform for standing up a new working group within the COP.
We could do that. I for sure, I think we need a community manager, someone who could help stand up the working group, help that working group run, help our other working groups run, help our community connect with each other, help with landscape analysis.
I see. So that funding is more broadly than just getting an RCN for images, you're talking about having a dedicated person to sort of manage these portfolios of working groups.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's how we can the game change. That's the game change is this is where you could come to get assistance to do a thing, to get collaborators, to get, I would say it's our own tiger, but it's our own tiger. That's how I
I
imagine
see.
it.
Yeah.
Familiar-
That was a nuance I didn't grasp in the COP session. So thanks.
And depending on like all of the hive mind here, if you have thoughts as to where that community manager could be funded from, is it a part-time person? Are we borrowing from somebody else? For a while, are we able to afford an entire person? It's very doable, but if we can get to an entire person, Kirsten, the conversations you and I have had about one geochemistry and getting it to its next step, standing up a world fair that is specific for geo is a possibility. Connecting in Leslie's discussion or Kirsten Elgar's work with the unions, how do we keep in collaboration there? How do we support that? I think it's all connected.
So I would argue it's a no-brainer. But seeing you've all attended to come, is anyone going to stand up and say, yes, we have to keep the IG going? Or does everyone agree we go down the path of the COP, the community practice? No comments. Everyone's madly leaving because they have to make a decision. Okay, right.
There's a chat. There's a chat.
Just put it in the chat. Yeah.
Again, there we go. Merging into the community of practice. Okay. That is what the agriculture folks did when they started their COP, if that's helpful for everyone.
Yeah.
They had an
So
idea and they
were
went
you
into-
engaged in that in the stand-up of the ag COP?
Only in the sense that I talked to them before we went down this path, that I have given talks to their COP, and I did talk to their co-chairs. They need their own community manager. They are struggling with the body of work. And that's a great problem to have.
So I guess I ask because there's a predecessor by which we can ask about, or maybe you've already done this. You've kind of done the brain dump of lessons learned and what processes they went through. And okay, great. Of course
They did not have enough leadership to do both. And the overlap was essentially 100%. So there was no need to keep one going when the body would. So let's say we want to have, let me spin out a possible, if anybody's lamenting that they'll feel left behind, right? Like, let's say it's on somebody's mind here, and highlighting Leslie's comment about research infrastructure. And do we want to dilute that within the COP? I would say no, let's not dilute that. Let's call that one of our themes, and we can have events that are specific to research infrastructure. We can focus on that as a community, and anyone interested in talking about that can come together. The COPDES, this would be a place to bring the things that are happening in COPDES, to collaborate, to encourage, should there be something about a publisher, we would invite other publisher groups from RDA and give an out brief here. I think COPDES should be a supporting, not absorbed, but a supporting entity, and any of the editors who are interested in, you've mentioned, Josh and Kirsten, that you talked to editors on what to do with imagery. I mean, the moment we have something that is an early version, we could easily run it by the RDA publishers across all the disciplines, the COPDES publishers. I mean, it would get potentially a little bit more airtime. Visibility.
Okay, look, I think we've made the decision. So I think the next slide, could you go to the next one,
Yeah.
please? Well, we don't really need, well, sorry. If we're merging the two, we don't necessarily need new chairs. If we were going to keep them separate, we were going to have to, because I wasn't doing both. But I guess the other thing too is, again, if anyone in the audience is interested in becoming a chair with the COP, please let us know. And Danny, I think we asked you to close, so you can close, please.
You did, but you still, yeah. I think there's not much for me to say. So we got our next, well, I don't know what our next steps are. So one of those was next steps. We decided maybe consensus. I mean, Steve plus one us, but I don't know if we led the witness. It sounds like we're moving to the COP, the community of practice. And let's see, is there any other,
Yeah, the next steps is getting that, the most urgent thing will be to get that case statement finished.
for the COP, yes.
Yeah.
And then certainly reach out if you want to join as chair, co-chair. And anything else we need to throw in the mix there for closing? I defer to Leslie or Shelley. Otherwise, thank you all. Thanks to all of our speakers. I know Kirsten already left, and Josh, that was amazing. Thanks for sharing your woes with us. And well, hopefully we'll
They're
move
joys,
forward
really.
on
They're,
this.
they're opportunities.
They are opportunities, definitely. They were very intriguing and certainly broadly applicable. So thanks everyone. And I'm gonna defer to how do we communicate progress on a COP? We do that through the interest groups, current interest groups infrastructure as we transition.
Yeah, I guess, Shelley, what do you want to do? I mean, how are we going to get people to participate in joining? The other thing too is that where do we approach RDA to say we want to close the IG? And then maybe we could just merge the two sites, merge the mailing list.
Yeah, wouldn't that be
That-
great? Once
that
they
is-
figure out the site.
Easy logistics. That I'm not concerned about at all. We should give everybody an opportunity to unjoin, you know, for good data hygiene, right? If anybody cleanse the list of anyone who didn't want to go there. And the case statement is very close. With the comments that just came in a couple days ago, I will make the final updates. I will send it out through, we do have 2 mailing lists. The COP is very small. So IG is the main one. I'll send it out to both, give everyone another chance to contribute. And the case statement just gets us stood up. And then we can use governance to take us forward. And the more participation, if I can find that funding, I think we can be wildly successful in supporting each other and working through challenges, just like what Josh and Kirsten brought to us today. I'm delighted to hear, not delighted to hear there's an issue, but delighted that they're here with us.
Opportunity.
And there's this opportunity to support each other to get an answer. Boom, just like you said.
Mic drop. Okay. So and
Okay,
that brings us to
that's it.
11:30. How convenient.
Right.
So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to our speakers and stay tuned for the transition to the community of practice.
You mean 1:30 a.m.?
Yes, 1:30. 1:30 a.m. Those who have
Tomorrow.
aqua aerobics coming up need to go to bed. So
Good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Leslie.
Bye.
good
Thanks,
night.
Jane.
Bye.
So long.
Yeah,
Good night.
thanks guys.